Greetings, everyone. I'm Robin Williams. You may remember me from Patch Adams, Aladdin, and Mrs. Doubtfire. Tonight I bring you a change in our usual programming. I will be reading an original story I have been working on for the better part of a decade. I'll be narrating the story, and the characters will be played by, shall we say, some familiar voices. Anyway, without any further ado, I shall begin reading my novel. It is called Rhino Men, Birth of Rhino Men. Chapter 1. Rydian Portcullis seized the durable fiberglass sledgehammer with his considerable grip. A good handle. His dead father would have loved it. Heaving it masculinely above his head with his robust, almost grotesquely strong arms, a bead of sweat might have been squeezed like honey from his brow and down through his thick black beard onto his solid brick of a chin if his body wasn't so completely at home in the searing heat of Texas. These tattooed arms hadn't known the weight of a hammer for long, but they were right at home here after their former lives in professional arm wrestling. Recently retired officially. One Herculean swing and the wall of the old bank shattered like the dreams of coddled children upon entering the workforce. Rydian Portcullis and his crew were responsible for many toppled buildings in this old ghost town, making space for some new shiny government project. Some might have thought it layman's work, but for Rydian and his team it was heaven. Just a bunch of pals or acquaintances, depending on which pal or acquaintance was making the designation, with big hammers and nobody breathing down their necks about regulations and footwear.
Hey, Rydian, you got any more hammers? Mine's all busted up,
shouted Ernest Assman Adderley, Rydian's oldest acquaintance from their days as Navy SEALs. He'd hooked Rydian up with this job 6 months ago. Ernest earned the name Assman after he took 8 bullets to the ass on duty in Iran. Fortunately, his hammering arms were undamaged.
Check the box of hammers in the truck,
replied Rydian, preparing another mighty, almost ridiculous swing. The glorious flaming eagle tattoo on his right forearm seemed to perform a dive bomb as the sledgehammer struck the bank again, detritus ejaculating from the epicenter of the strike. His bare chest, tastefully peppered with kingly hair, rippled like a flag of flesh in the sun's golden rays. Sleeping in the truck was the old-timer Huck Powers. He wasn't so great at hammering and such, but he got the boys to work so they didn't mind him slacking off on occasion. His pit-stained T-shirt read, "Watch out, snowflakes. I have a flamethrower." And it was completely true. He kept it in the back next to the hammers. Ernest slapped the driver's side door to the truck.
Think we're almost done for the day, Huck. Bank's almost down. Need a fresh hammer to finish it off, though.
Hey, go easy. We only have a few dozen left,
replied Huck, cracking a warm cream soda. Ernest grabbed a fresh hammer from the truck. He rested it on his shoulder and headed back to the busted-up bank. They'd been hammering at it for nearly 10 hours.
Hey, Rydian, when we're done, do you want to go grab a drink at O'Thompson's place? Cindy is singing tonight, and I think I might get lucky, said Ernest Assman Adderley.
No, I think I'll pass. Got a thing tonight,
replied Rydian Portcullis as he absolutely destroyed a bit of the bank. He did have a thing tonight. Sure, not so long ago, some serious shit had gone down in his professional arm wrestling career, leading to his early retirement and public disgrace. But Rydian's skills were still highly valuable in the underground ring. Around these parts, the game was run by Hamilton Cigarilli, a disgraced arm wrestling promoter turned illegal nightclub proprietor and underground arm wrestling organizer. His events drew big crowds, although the clientele wasn't so savory. Broken arms and snapped shoulders were a matter of course at these packed events, but Cigarilli paid decent win or lose and always threw in a bottle of Jack. Rydian was somewhat of a clandestine underground celebrity in the ring. He'd never lost a match. Old man Huck honked the horn. He had 7 kids back home, so once the clock hit 5, he was always itching to haul ass. The sun beat down on the men as they loaded the hammers into the truck, careful not to scratch Huck's flamethrower. It was his dead father's.
You know, I got a bad feeling,
said Assman, lighting 2 cigarettes as Huck reversed the truck.
Something in the air ain't right.
Try coming home to 7 ruckus chillins and a disappointed wife. Place stinks of old milk and the porch is covered in shit. Real shit, too. Dog shit. Old Hank's got bad bowels. Plus Mabel's goddamn birds. Try that for bad air,
replied old-timer Huck. Rydian Portcullis, the main character, ignored the inane chat. He wasn't much superstitious, nor was he a family man. Bad air wasn't going to get in his way tonight. Tonight he had an underground arm wrestling ring to dominate.
You dumb, Rydian,
said Huck.
You ain't said shit today, and asshole here ain't exactly stimulating me.
It was true, Rydian was quiet. Before any arm wrestling event, or really whenever he woke up, Rydian would enter a trance-like state of mind he had never had to describe to any other man nor lady. Since childhood, he had developed a method of sharpening his brute force through strength of will and stoic, solemn masculinity. Thousands upon thousands of sexual encounters had left him divorced of the need for any physical pleasure, allowing him to focus his body squarely and truly on the virile pursuit of aggressive body manipulation techniques. In this state, his muscle tissue and mind would lock their step in symmetric alignment, obfuscating the pain and ego that make strong men weak and which enslaves pitiful men to impotent lives. Once in motion, a dutiful focus toward functional engaged anatomy would emerge like a powerlifting butterfly from a blood-soaked cocoon. A zone of complete synaptic focus, heightened awareness, and ultimate dynamic mind-body control. The stalwart impulse.
Just mind on other things,
said Rydian Portcullis with the gruffness of a 50-a-day grizzly. But really his mind was nowhere, everywhere, neverywhere, otherwise known as the stalwart impulse.
Still not ready to talk about her? Believe me, Rydian, I get it. They say time heals all. Maybe you just need some more,
replied Huck. He truly was a good acquaintance. But once enveloped by the stalwart impulse, Rydian had little room for emotional discourse. Maybe that was the point? Rydian hadn't spoken to anyone. It had been 6 months since it happened. Most nights, if he wasn't arm wrestling, Rydian would work out until 2 a.m. listening to the Eagles. It was Danielle's favorite group. It all felt like some sick dream. He wasn't sure if he could ever talk about it or even think about it.
I'm fine. Just gotta focus on this thing.
From what I hear, that Cigarilli is a guy you don't want to get involved with,
said the old-timer Huck, a fearful quiver in his otherwise somewhat manly voice.
Heard about a guy who owed him money over horse racing. The guy goes missing. No one knows where he is. When they eventually found his body, Jesus, Rydian, the guy had a goddamn severed horse cock shoved up his ass.
Sounds like a tall tale to me, Huck. Don't listen to everything you hear at the pool club,
said Rydian Portcullis. Huck dropped off Assman at O'Thompson's first. A rowdy biker's bar, the front of which was festooned with Harleys, scrap, and a few old dogs. A consort of bearded, leather-clad men greeted Huck. Burly, but otherwise harmless, they were all old buddies. Rydian had joined Assman on a couple of occasions and had won a few $1,000 playing pool.
Sounds like Cindy's already started her set. Sure you don't want to join him, Rydian? Get back out there again?
Asked Huck.
I'm sure,
replied Rydian, lighting up 3 cigarettes.
Sure,
replied Huck. He wouldn't press it further, but he wanted to. Oh, how he wished that Rydian would open up about what happened that day 6 months ago, but Rydian wouldn't, and he wouldn't press it further, even though if he could persuade him to open up about it, he would. But he didn't want to pressure the guy. What happened 6 months ago was truly terrible, so he wouldn't press it further, although he wished he could. But he wouldn't. It was just better this way.
I get it,
Huck continued, ignoring his own inner voice, which told him not to press it further.
Can't imagine what it takes to keep going after something so terrible. I just don't want to see you getting pulled into dark places.
Rydian took a deep drag on his 3 cigarettes. He knew the old bastard meant well. He said nothing, and Huck took the hint. He probably wouldn't press it further. Cigarilli's place was in town. Huck wouldn't drive him all the way. He had the family and a porch load of shit to get back to. The truck rumbled under the weight of 30 or so hammers as they rolled up to Huck's place, as much a mess as he'd described. A slow, tortured bark greeted them as they approached. Hank was a dutiful, if ponderous, guard dog.
Go on,
shouted Huck, slamming the truck door.
Attaboy.
As Rydian alighted the vehicle, Huck's porch light flickered on. Huck's wife, Mabel, stood there in her pajamas, hair wet. She'd actually had a shower.
Huck actually do any hammering today?
Called Mabel.
Yes, ma'am,
replied Rydian.
Took the bank down near on his own.
She scoffed in derision, hand on hip.
I don't believe a word of it. The man's got no calluses. Just you be sure he ain't taking advantage of you younger men.
Want to come in for a drink or dinner even?
Asked Huck.
No thanks, I had better be off. My best to you and your kids, Miss Powers,
said Rydian. He slung his duffel bag across his back. He looked like a tougher, stronger Rambo.
And why is it Huck's making you walk home again? It must take you 2 hours to get into town.
He likes the walk, May. Said he sleeps better.
That's right, ma'am.
Well, all right. You know Huck's been worried about you since, well, you're welcome anytime. Dinner's ready, Huck, you sexy bastard.
Rydian Portcullis gave a final nod of thanks and started down the road. He could hear Huck cussing, no doubt due to one of Hank's movements finding its way under his boot. The walk was long. Truth was, he didn't want to invite Huck into his life any more than was necessary. Friends and lovers had a habit of becoming difficult memories. Cigarilli's wouldn't open until 11, so he had plenty of time to gather his focus. Living in the shadow of catastrophe was made tenable through Rydian's management and control of the stalwart impulse. As he strode into the evening, dust for company, he only looked ahead. When he arrived in town, he grabbed a cheap steak from a diner and ate it beneath a sickly, artificial glare. He still had a few hours to kill, so he walked to a kid's playground to get in a workout. It was late, and the park had an unintended clientele. A troop of consenting adults were out dogging in the brightly colored fort. To the sounds of their hushed moans, Rydian began his routine. Pull-ups first, 300. At 10:30, Rydian made his way to Cigarilli's. He would win tonight, that wasn't in doubt. Weren't many contenders in the underground, not for someone with Rydian's experience. He'd once been sponsored. He had even sold a few T-shirts on the internet. He wasn't Brad Pitt famous, but it was a good spell, best times of his life. That's how he'd met Danielle. She had worked at the T-shirt printing factory.
Am I ready to think about Danielle?
Rydian said quietly to himself, and then a few seconds later he said,
Probably not.
Chapter 2. The time of the underground arm wrestling event had arrived as expected. Ridian strode into the old meat factory, an old meat factory which looked dilapidated from the outside but really housed an underground club featuring an illegal arm wrestling arena plus retro video game arcade. His arms, naturally heroic in circumference, were especially thick and swollen following his intense playground workout. 300 pull-ups to warm up, followed by a near incalculable amount, well, not to Ridian, who was excellent at counting, of handstand push-ups. Midway through, the swingers in the kiddie castle decided he was watching them, and a fully erect dude came out with a shiv in hand. Ridian snapped his arm real quick and sent him on his way.
Password,
Said a deep voice through the metal door to the old meat factory.
Renaissance fair.
Said Ridian Portcullis, his voice sounding absolutely untroubled. The door slid swiftly open. Ridian had to sort of sidle through the door at a funny angle, since his shoulders were simply too intimidatingly vast for him to walk through as a lesser, that is, normal man would. And this wasn't a particularly thin door. Inside, the guard who had opened the door was armed with a really big machine gun that looked particularly dangerous and powerful. Ridian didn't say a word, proceeding to walk down a long, curling flight of metal stairs, which, as with the door, was not built for colossal men such as he. The one entrance and exit to the arm wrestling pit, club, and retro arcade, it was a complete fire hazard. Thankfully for the proprietor, Hamilton Cigarilli, operating underground, both literally and figuratively, meant little interference from fire safety standards officials. As Ridian descended, having a few awkward moments where people were coming up the stairs and had to turn back around as it was simply not happening, the sound of loud, bassy club music grew louder and louder. The pulsing rhythms attempted to enter Ridian's ear canals, but were buttressed by the counter-pulses naturally produced by the stalwart impulse, which he continued to totally control. The depths of the old meat factory were a strobe-lit cesspool filled to bursting with debauched scoundrels and pathetic, sycophantic scumbags. Surrounded by their hangers-on, gangbangers, pimps, and drug lords, swigged expensive sparkling wines from oversized bottles, watched over by extremely hardened, but not by Ridian standards, ex-military types with earpieces and, more often than not, mustaches. The dolled-up serving girls exchanged weighty tips for weightier ass slaps. Murders happened most nights. One time a chimpanzee with a Glasgow smile had beaten a waiter to death over a spilt banana sundae, and he was one of the kinder chimps you'd find down here. When he finally emerged from the staircase, the whole journey took 8 minutes, Ridian noted that Cigarilli wasn't in the VIP booth. Making his way through the crowds with his gargantuan frame would have been challenging if it weren't for the way the club's guests showed a natural deference to him, backing from his path as peasants would a king. His reputation preceded him. It was only a matter of time before someone offered him a drink. Over the sound of the would-be deafening, if it weren't for the stalwart impulse and Portcullis's naturally strong eardrums, music, Ridian heard a familiar voice calling out to him.
Perfectly on time, as always,
Said Dragonhawk Zero, an old arm wrestling buddy now retired. He just liked to watch the matches these days. He wasn't as handsome as Ridian, didn't carry himself with the same brutal beauty, nor was he as tall, strong, or purposeful in his decision-making. However, compared to any other regular man in the world, Dragonhawk Zero was a paragon with a near godlike physique and A-list actor looks. Long, dazzling hair caressed his mountainous shoulders and back like a golden shower twinkling in Zeus's pristine porcelain bathroom at the very peak of Mount Olympus. Ridian patted Dragonhawk Zero on the shoulder by way of greeting, the sheer force of which caused an unintentional sonic boom. It was just a small one, but enough to cause the partygoers within a 10-meter radius to lose their footing, with several drinks spilled. A few would-be tough guys dared to shoot a peeved glance at the ludicrously impressive pair of gentlemen, but quickly realized their errors and instead ordered both Ridian and Dragonhawk Zero drinks. Ridian now already had 18 drinks lined up.
I'm always on time, Dragonhawk Zero.
Replied Ridian with a modicum of genuine respect.
Where's Cigarilli? Not like him to miss an event.
Oh, he's here. Listen to me. From what I hear, there's a new contender tonight. Someone who might actually be able to beat you.
Ridian would have perhaps emoted the slightest controlled eyebrow raise at this rumor if it were not for the fact that Dragonhawk Zero was utterly incorrect. There was no man out there who could beat him. It was a simple fact. Ridian drank 3 of his drinks in quick succession, not because he was nervous, he was simply thirsty.
We'll see.
At the center of the basement club was the arm wrestling arena, otherwise known as the Arena for Arm Wrestling. Hamilton Cigarilli wasn't known for being great with naming things, although he had named his penis the Anaconda, which Ridian was unimpressed by, but Dragonhawk Zero openly wished he'd thought of first. Suddenly the music shut off and a velvet rope was hooked across the foot of the long winding staircase. Several late arrivals were trapped coming down and made to make the 8-minute journey back up. A large brute stood next to the stairs, prepared to wag his finger and shake his head at anyone who tried to exit the club. A side door crashed open, and Hamilton Cigarilli brusquely barged through the crowd and onto the raised stage. The place was in an uproar, the bar's disgusting patrons cheering the impending spectacle of good old arm wrestling fun.
Ladies and gentlemen, is this thing on?
Cigarilli began, his microphone squeaking horribly as he tapped it a few times. Cigarilli was, for all intents and purposes, essentially a clone of Danny DeVito. When you're reading his dialogue and picturing him, just think of DeVito. If this book ever became a movie, I'm just making it easy for the casting director now. And hopefully easy for the reader or listener, too.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have a great show tonight. A really great show. We've got some great warm-up matches. We've got the Pirate Devil, Insane Simon Richardson, back for revenge against his old rival, the Snap King, Rudy Whaler.
Cigarilli really knew how to draw the crowd in while his cronies pickpocketed the least sober audience members.
Then we got a new face. Oh, come on, give him a chance. He's a tough-looking kid with arms of steel, Sebastian King Kong Riley. And he is going to be taking on the one, the only Candlemaker.
A huge round of applause erupted at the mention of Candlemaker.
Isn't he like 100 years old? I thought he retired.
Asked Dragonhawk Zero.
He's 115, and no, he never retired.
Replied Rydian.
And finally, we got a real special match for you tonight, my dear friends.
Said Cigarilli in a really Danny DeVito-ish way.
The reigning undefeated champion of the arena for arm wrestling. The man who, it is said, once threw a Doberman over 6 lanes of traffic and safely into a dog ambulance.
You'll have to tell me that story.
Said Dragonhawk Zero, impressed with Rydian as always.
The one, the only, Portcullis.
Yelled Cigarilli as the hordes of arm wrestling enthusiasts began to bring the house down. Rydian didn't do this for the introductions, he didn't do it for the praise, he didn't do it for the offers of sex, although those were utterly plentiful. He didn't do it for the money or the reputation. He did it because he loved to completely dominate other men in an arena-like setting such as this arena. He stepped onto the stage, 8 spotlights now illuminating his denim on denim look for all to see.
That's a fuckload of denim,
shouted a fashion-conscious gentleman in the crowd. The rowdy buzz inside the moist, heaving club would have agitated a feebler man, but for Rydian Portcullis, sequestered as he was by the protective and performance-enhancing aura of the stalwart impulse, this was nothing. Less than nothing. The flickering strobe effects that would startle and damage even the staunchest of untrained eyes instead appeared to Rydian as would a tenderly shaded and slowly rotating nightlight, seen through a warm, rose-tinted filter while still allowing crystal-clear focal efficiency. The vile and lecherous faces which stared up at him were as insignificant as unnamed space debris orbiting a glorious sun. Rydian's body began running routine yet unnecessary pre-fight diagnostics. As his subconscious mind sent jolts of controlled electricity to probe his inner self, he noted a generous and healthy heartbeat, 99.6% repaired muscle fibers. Well, he had done a full day of hammering and a small workout before the gig. 0 broken bones, 1 gray hair, an extremely potent and heavy load of semen, and an arm-snapping strength matching the bite force of a saltwater crocodile.
And what about the mental load caused by not thinking about Danielle?
If Rydian had that thought, it didn't cross his mind.
But we all know Portcullis is undefeatable, don't we?
Continued Cigarilli, finally getting to Rydian's challenger.
Why even bother watching? What is it, Rydian? 3,000 victories?
4,000.
Shouted Dragonhawk Zero, ever a stickler for numbers.
Well, my fair audience, tonight we have a real contender, and I start with a riddle.
The crowd went quiet as Cigarilli, or if you just want to think of him as Danny DeVito, that is fine, puffed a long cigar.
What do you get if you cross the DNA of a disgraced professional arm wrestling champion with Rhino DNA and grow it in a lab for 6 months?
Before the crowd could spend a moment considering Cigarilli's unusual riddle, the room was disturbed suddenly with a thunderous stomping noise accompanied by the shuddering of the ground and a swathe of falling dust from the ceiling. From his vantage point on the stage, Rydian could make out a hulking silhouette approaching from an extremely wide and tall door he hadn't noticed until now. Gasps, shrieks, and even a few farts could be heard as the mysterious challenger neared. As the shape passed Dragonhawk Zero, Rydian noticed him began to physically convulse, perfect teeth chattering uncontrollably, and then it emerged from the shadows, its bulbous head drawing upwards and releasing a tortured sound. The quality of the yelp was half the scream of a man, 1/8 wolf-like howl, 1/4 rhino grunt, and 2/16 goofy holler.
What have you done, Cigarilli?
Said Rydian, outwardly calm. But his eyebrow was raised nearly halfway up. Okay, that was the end of Chapter 2. Tune in next time for Chapter 3. In fact, you can have a brief taster of it now. The challenger standing before Rydian was an abomination. Its shirtless bipedal frame resembled a gray flesh-encased boulder underneath which sat enormous, unreasonable musculature which caused the skin to ripple and roll like a leather flag in a hurricane as the biceps, triceps, and pecs attempted to puncture their sickly gray sheath. Thickets of black hair like spider legs covered the creature's arms and chest, with the aforementioned rippling and rolling creating in Rydian's creative brain the image of an horrific, ungodly cornfield of bristling, tangled stalks. The tight white trunks it wore barely concealed its alarmingly large penis.
Thanks for sharing your story, Robin. Thanks to all you subscribers for waiting. I hope you enjoy this project. Lots of love. Spatch.